One of the most controversial topics within the criminal justice system is whether a person is born a criminal or they are made into a criminal. This is most evident in serial killers because it is easy for us to rationalize the evil of some people by saying that they were born to kill and that there was nothing we could do to fix them. Today I will be covering a man who committed crimes so evil that he is a perfect example of people who were made into a monster, not born a monster. William Bonin was born on January 8, 1947. When William Bonin was born, his life did not start great. William Bonin is a great person to study if you want to prove that serial killers are made, not born. William Bonin's father served in the military during World War II. When his father, Robert, came back, he was not only different but seemed broken. Robert, William Bonin's father, started to not only beat him but also beat his mother and his older brother. By the time William's younger brother was born, he had already been abused. His mother Alice endured so much abuse that she became an alcoholic just like Robert. Both of the Williams parents were alcoholics, which meant that the children did not have anyone present in their life. They had nobody to look up to. Imagine the message that this sends to a young child like William. His parents did not care whether he had eaten, had clean clothes on, or if was safe or alive. Every night before bed, the neighbors would see them and pity them. They would provide them with free meals or new clothes to wear. William also had a grandfather who was a convicted child molester and pedophile who sexually abused William and his two younger brothers. William was suffering abuse from everyone he was supposed to look up to, without knowing his parents were creating a monster. In 1953, Bonin was sent to go live in an orphanage where he would once again be physically abused, as the orphanage used physical discipline when the children didn't behave. Then once again he would be sexually abused by a priest that would abuse each boy at the orphanage. When William would fight back, the priest would tie him down using restraint. Since the priest was sexually abusing the boys at the orphanage, the boys started sexually abusing one another. By the time he was 8, William had already been sexually abused by 3 people: his father, his grandfather, and the priest at the orphanage. So by the time other boys at the orphanage started to sexually abuse him, he was numb to it. He only requested that the boys tie his hands down. By the age of 8, William had expected sexual abuse to occur. When he was 9, he would move back with his mother. However, he soon fell into a life of delinquency. He would steal license plates, food, and other items. At the age of 10, he was caught stealing by the police and sent to a juvenile detention center. All the sexual abuse he had endured made him used to it, so he engaged in sexual activity with the other boys and older staff members. He spent 5 years there from 1966 to 1971. Once he was 14, his father moved the family from the small town of Wilmington, Connecticut to Los Angeles, California. Shortly after arriving, their father would die of cancer. Now that he was 14, he would continue the cycle of abuse by sexually abusing kids in his neighborhood and his younger brother. Many think this was a defense mechanism because his whole life he had been abused, so he thought that if he was the one doing the abuse, he wouldn't be abused anymore. He had transitioned from prey to predator because he knew that he would never be hurt again if he was the one abusing people. Now that he was 14, he would continue the cycle of abuse by sexually abusing kids in his neighborhood and his younger brother. Many think this was a defense mechanism because his whole life he had been abused, so he thought if he was the one doing the abuse, he wouldn't be abused anymore. He had transitioned from prey to predator because he knew in his mind that he would never be hurt again if he was the one hurting people. In 1965, Bonin graduated high school, and this was the year that the Vietnam War broke out. Bonin would enlist in the military as a helicopter gunner. He would record 700 hours of combat, where he would provide covering fire for the Marines on the ground. When he was in the military, he would show signs of the monster he had become. By raping 2 servicemen separately, he cornered them and pointed a pistol at them, telling them that if they didn't do what he said, he would shoot them. He did this as a sign of power, showing the other 2 men that he was above them and that he was the one who was in charge. Bonin had endured physical and sexual violence, which means that he no longer wanted to be viewed as weak or inferior, so he raped in order for people to see him as superior. Before Bonin joined the war, he would get engaged to a woman. However, by the time he returned, his fiancée had left him for another man. Bonin didn't kill his first victim, Billy Jones. He saw Billy on the side of the road, so he offered the young boy a ride to his house. He then asked him questions about homosexuality, to which the young boy reacted by attempting to get out of the car. Bonin then knocked the boy unconscious, sexually assaulted him, and dumped his body by a park, and told him if he told anyone, he would return to his house and kill him. For about 4 months, from November 1968 to March 1969, he would sodomize, molest, and orally copulate 4 more boys. He had the same MO for each. He would offer a ride to wherever they were going. Then he would ask questions about homosexuality, to which most of the boys would respond negatively to. Then he would threaten them with a gun, knife, or tire iron. He would tie the victim up and would sexually assault them before letting them go. He would let every victim know that if they told the police, he would find them and kill them. He would be caught in the middle of assaulting Timothy Wilson, where a policeman would arrest him and find handcuffs, tools, and ropes in his van. He would be arrested and indicted on charges of kidnapping, rape, and molestation. He would be sent to a state psychiatric hospital, where he would be diagnosed as a sexual psychopath. As I said before, his psychology and mental state are very interesting because can you truly blame him for his actions? Now, I am not saying what he did is correct, because it isn't, but it was all he knew. He had been raped by his father, grandfather, and the priest at the orphanage, and other boys at the orphanage. To him, this is what love was. The doctor also noticed that the physical abuse he had endured had affected his prefrontal cortex. This is the part of brain that controls us, helps us notice social cues, and also helps us with decision making. This could partly explain why he constantly behaved poorly. He literally couldn't have empathy for other people. However, as I said, this does not excuse his actions, as he literally could not help himself while he was at the state psychiatric hospital. He raped inmates in the shower. In 1973, he was transferred to a prison where he was released for parole after a year. In June of 1974, he was released from prison after serving 5 years. He once again took to the road. However, it wasn't long before he would commit another crime. On September 8, 1975, he would pick up David McVigar, who was hitchhiking. Then Bonin would ask him if he was gay. Then McVigar tried to get away, but Bonin pointed a gun at him and then sexually assaulted him. Bonin attempted to strangle him with his shirt, but he heard McVigar cry, which made him stop. He would drop him off at his house. Then a few days later, he would attempt to run over a boy who had rejected his advances for sex. He would be arrested and charged with rape. However, he was arrested on December 1975 and released only a few years later on November 1978. Once Bonin was released, he would find his first real friend at a party. Bonin made enough money from working odd jobs that he felt it was time for him to go to parties at his next door neighbor's house. This is where he would meet his accomplice for most of his heinous crimes, Vernon Butts. Butts was a part-time magician and full-time factory worker. He was a part-time magician because he was obsessed with magic, witchcraft, and cults. Butts and Bonin both had homicidal thoughts, and the more time they spent with each other, the more time they would tell each other their fantasies. Then Butts confessed to Bonin that he did want to kill people. That was the beginning of the end. The first victim was 13-year-old Thomas Glen Lundren. He was picked up by Bonin attempting to hitchhike. He was then found dead near the freeway with multiple stab wounds, head damage caused by repeated blows using a tire iron. Worst of all, Bonin had cut off the sexual organs of the boy. William Bonin had finally graduated from serial rapist to serial killer. The second person Bonin and Butts killed was 17-year-old Mark Shelton. He would be kidnapped. Butts would then drive around while Bonin climbed into the back seat. Bonin would then rape the boy, but also sodomize him with objects he had brought along, such as sticks. This would shock Mark so much that his heart stopped and he died of shock. They would dump the bodies near the San Bernardino freeway. Less than 24 hours later, the pair would pick up Marcus Graves, who would be hitchhiking. Bonin would proceed to rape him while also choking him. Marcus would attempt to fight back, but Bonin would grab the knife and stab him 77 times. His body was dumped near Malibu Creek. During the next 4 months, the pair were unstoppable, as they claimed 4 more victims: 18-year-old Robert Werdeshek, 15-year-old Donald Ray Hayden, 17-year-old Davis Lewis Merlo. Then they killed 18-year-old John Doe, who remains unidentified to this day. All these victims had the same MO. Most of the victims were strangled with either their clothes, Bonin's bare hands, or a piece of ligature. The victims would also be sexually abused. Each victim had been raped, sodomized with various objects, and lastly, beaten in the head with a blunt object. One victim even had ice picks stabbed into his ear. After these victims, it became too much for Butts to handle. Bonin on numerous occasions would beg Butts to come along to kill another victim. This was most likely because Bonin needed a crowd, someone to see him commit his crimes. His whole life, nobody paid attention to him. In his own sick and demented mind, this is how he got his validation. Having someone watch him commit these crimes was part of the reason he committed them in the first place. He liked the attention. For the next 3 victims, Bonin would commit his crimes by himself. Frank Dennis Fox, a 17-year-old, 15-year-old John Frederick Kilpatrick, and lastly, 16-year-old Michael Francis McDonald. The fact that Butts wasn't there to witness these crimes made Bonin behave and attack in a manner even more deranged and horrific, as all the boys were strangled with Bonin's bare hands, and they were raped and sodomized with foreign objects. But worst of all, they all had their sexual organs removed or crushed to the point that they couldn't be recognized. All these boys were dumped near Highway 71, which is how authorities were finally able to conclude that they had a serial killer on their hands. Thus the name Highway Killer was given to William Bonin, as the total number of victims rose to 10. However, even after a few weeks, Butts did still not want to join Bonin, so Bonin got a new partner. Gregory Miley was a mentally unstable man with an IQ less than 55. He was easily manipulated. This was perfect for Bonin, as he was able to have someone watch him commit his crimes, which is all he wanted. They would both rape 15-year-old Charles Miranda. Bonin would rape him, then Miley would try to, but he couldn't sustain an erection, so they sodomized him with various objects. They dumped his body near the alleyway across the freeway. On the same day, 12-year-old Jacob Macabe was also raped and killed by the pair, and his body was dumped in a dumpster. The next three victims would be killed by Bonin, but by himself. 18-year-old Ronald Glen and 14-year-old Glen Norman Baker would both be raped and killed. Lastly, 15-year-old Russell Dane Wrong would also be raped and killed. However, just like the previous time, he acted alone. He was more violent alone, as all three victims had their anus distended and had their sexual organs or entire body mutilated. This was because the more he killed, the more numb he became to it, so he needed more extreme killings to reach the level of euphoria, just like a drug addict who needs a big dose or more extreme drugs to get high. In March 1980, Bonin would meet another accomplice, 17-year-old William Ray Pugh, who, like Bonin, had been in and out of prison his whole life and had a difficult upbringing. Bonin saw much of himself in Pugh. 15-year-old runaway Harry Todd Turner would be the only victim killed by Pugh and Bonin. The boy was raped and killed, then they dumped his body behind a Los Angeles business. 16-year-old Stephen John Wood was killed and raped by Bonin, who dumped his body near the Pacifica Coast Highway. Then, 19-year-old Darin Kendrick would be picked up by Bonin and driven to Bud's house, where the pair would proceed to torture him by pouring hydrochloric acid down his throat before raping him and stabbing him in the ear with ice picks. Then his next two victims were killed but not raped. 17-year-old Lawrence Sharp was strangled to death, and 14-year-old Sean King was also killed. His last victim was Stephen Wells, who was raped and killed by Bonin. However, he stuffed his body inside a cardboard box to show Butts what he had done. Bonin had a total of 4 accomplices that he committed the murders with. Even though he was the only one who killed people, having a crowd no doubt fueled his thirst for killing. However, much like a house of cards, if you remove just one card, the whole house will collapse, which is exactly what happened when one of Bonin's accomplices got caught. Pugh got caught trying to steal cars. He heard police officers talking about the case and offered William Bonin's name in exchange for a lighter sentence. The police would then have constant surveillance on Bonin for several days. The police watched him live an ordinary life. However, on the 9th day, he would crack and pick up a boy. On June 11, 1980, police would see the van parked in a parking lot. The officers heard muffled screams, so they quickly swarmed the van. They opened the doors to find Bonin in the process of raping 17-year-old Harold Eugene Tate. Bonin would be charged with multiple counts of rape, kidnapping, sodomy, and murder. The evidence for all these charges was found in Bonin's van. Authorities found multiple fibers of the same fabric that was on most of the victims' necks, blunt objects like the one most victims had been hit in the head with, and the blood and semen stains that Bonin left on most of the victims. Officers also found newspaper clippings that were related to the freeway killer. However, the piece of evidence that was most important was the confession that Bonin made to authorities. He confessed to killing and raping 21 boys. Even with all this evidence, Bonin claimed his innocence, so it went to court where he was found guilty. Bonin would be charged and found guilty on 14 counts of murder and rape in Los Angeles County and a further 5 counts of rape and murder in San Bernardino County. In both cases, the jury would find him guilty and recommend the death penalty. His accomplices were also charged. However, before Vernon Butts could be convicted, he would hang himself in his jail cell. Gregory Miley was sentenced to 25 to life. William Pugh received 6 years for manslaughter, and James Monroe was sentenced 15 years to life. All but Pugh died in prison. Pugh was released in 1985. Bonin was executed on February 23, 1996, via lethal injection.
He was trying to stop me from stabbing them, and I was just stabbing, just to stab, stuck them in different places. with the knife. Because I didn't know where to stab. I don't know where vital organs are or anything like that. Pain inflicted, yes, like squeezing of the nuts and stuff like that, but not a constant thing. I said, I'm going to choke you till you're unconscious, and that's it. So I choked him, and that was it.
And as always, thank you for watching.